Sabrina the Animated Series, Episode 11. The school bell sounds annoying, and in my high school it had a bell that didn't sound annoying. Eventually, Chloe says the guys are drooling over Jem. Since when? So she sure is unlucky that Harvey doesn't date her. Sabrina sees a photo of a girl in Harvey's locker, and then when she decides to go to the mall with Chloe, Harvey shudders at the picture of the girl who's creepily skinny and turns the paper over to the other side. There's no way it even had the photo then. The plot could have easily not been forced. There's no way a photo of a supermodel would actually make it obvious you can see her ribs. Well, I don't read supermodel magazines, so maybe it is, but it seems like a kid-style exaggeration, when we don't even need that for a story where Sabrina tries to fit into overly tight pants. It could have just started here. Eventually, Salem shows them a machine to help them button them. Does he just have so little faith in Sabrina's magic skills he thinks he has to give her artifacts? You could save on padding by not having the artifacts or Spooky, but at least it requires creativity from the writer to think up what each artifact looks like. She goes into a machine after she and Chloe are somehow afraid to for no stated reason when they'd only think it was dangerous if it's because they remember that Salem's magic constantly backfires on her. And if they realize that, they have even less of an excuse to go with it. She leaves it and she thinks the pants fits, but the button flings off. And Salem swallows it. Considering this shows Salem is the most unlikable he's ever been, I can understand the writers hating him. I guess the problem is they don't go far enough then. Chloe is the voice of reason by saying she should zap up jeans that fit. Why doesn't she just tell her to use magic to lose weight? It was obvious she had to do that immediately. Sabrina stupidly plans to watch what they eat, and eat something she hates. Chloe says they should get exercise, but that's forced if she was immediately going to say she meant walking to the Spooky jar. And again, I have to assume she only wants her to use Spooky to conserve her magic. If the writer knows Sabrina should have seen her idea coming, why didn't she think of it instantly? Why does Sabrina waste time telling her aunts she needs a spell when she knows they're always hypocritically telling her not to use magic while constantly doing so? Make me wonder why they want to lecture her at all. Zelda gets the chance to explain why she disapproves of the spell. It's just because she knows they look fine as they are. But to be fair, being told that doesn't talk people out of being too desperate to lose weight. So for once it's realistic that this was a waste of time. It takes too long for the ants to figure out that Salem gave them fleas. It could have been a more interesting explanation for their itchiness. I thought they were cursed by a witch. So I guess it's justified that they took too long to assume it was Salem. Instead, they run after Salem, wanting to give him a flea bath and chase him out of the room so the characters are able to use Spooky. This wouldn't have happened if they just pointed to get rid of the fleas from the house. Why does Spooky waste their time asking their names, quests, and favorite color? That's out of character. He never does that, partly because he knows their names. Eventually, the two of them stand on a magic scale and one of them turns her weight down on it. I say one of them because they aren't distinct enough from each other, then I would instantly remember who it is, a couple of seconds later. If she gets a bad feeling, why does the plot continue? Predictably, Harvey doesn't even notice how they look different, because he doesn't care about their weights. The writer's sadistic enough to make their pants fall down in front of everyone in the cafeteria. There's no way Harvey wouldn't hear Sabrina talk about the spell's problem under the table. At first it seemed confusing that the two of them started shrinking and kept doing so throughout the episode, because that isn't what they wanted and Spooky would know that. But it makes sense to Spooky to make this part of the spell to force them to want the spell undone before they get sick from being underweight, since he cares. I thought the episode was leading up to showing their ribs and the realistic consequences of being unhealthily underweight, and that actually succeeded in delivering the message. But instead, to anyone not thinking about the why, the spell seems forced, as it seems to come completely out of nowhere. What's really forced is that Sabrina doesn't instantly use magic to undo the spell on them. Maybe most of the times she uses an artifact or a Spooky scroll, it should just be a potion she drinks. Because I could buy it not being gotten rid of right away by pointing if it's explained that it's in her stomach, and until she's done digesting it, there's nothing she can do. Even then, that would just be all the more reason for her to not use them. Nothing interesting happens after they walk through the pants and then end up in her locker. It is realistic that Chloe bickers with Sabrina over this because she got her into the situation. I'm glad this only lasts a little scene. Eventually it rains and somehow instantly fills the dry riverbank, trapping them on an island. And they need a paper boat. But Sabrina would never be so stupid as to think they need a boat here. Sabrina warped herself and Harvey in a previous episode, so they would have warped home instantly. Eventually, Sabrina hears Harvey say he doesn't get girls who try to stuff themselves into tight pants. It gets unrealistic and lame when both he and his friend say, "Be yourself." I never liked his friend because not only does he have no personality, and when he does get one, it's just annoying, but how can he even see? So he seems stupid. Eventually, a spinning skateboard flings them into a mailbox, and they end up in an envelope and quickly carries it into the house. Somehow, Chloe wonders how they're going to make it all the way up there to the magic scale that had no business being up there instead of on the floor like a normal scale. How are they so stupid when a witch is beside her? I shouldn't need to explain witches can fly. Sabrina pushes Chloe and she doesn't get hurt from the huge fall. To be fair, ants can survive huge falls too because they're small. But if it was following the square cube law, then I have to wonder if it makes sense that these two haven't frozen to death already, because their bodies wouldn't be able to produce enough heat proportionally with their size. It turns out Quigley wasn't Quigley in this scene at all, and instead Zelda disguised herself to sneak up on and bathe Salem. It's a bit meaner than simply freezing time or freezing him in time. I can understand them wanting to get back at him, because he's a jerk who keeps ruining Sabrina's day. But still, if they were really good people, they would just freeze him in time for the whole time they were bathing him, just to be merciful. Very conveniently, Sabrina and Chloe get sent up in bubbles from this, when realistically I'm sure they'd have drowned. And conveniently, they end up near the scale and get returned to normal. Zelda asks if they used the spooky jar without permission. I now have to question in what circumstances they're actually allowed to use it, because she always acts like magic is evil because it makes life easier. By that logic, technology is evil too, but I don't see her banning that. Thankfully, the story ends with a gag at Salem's expense instead of Sabrina being punished. Not even for dragging a mortal into her magic misuse. Something good about the show is that it never actually shows Sabrina suffering through the effect of being grounded. I hope this stays true. But something that sucks that I took too long to notice because it's hard to notice in absence is that it still isn't explained how the household has money. We aren't told the jobs of her aunts from episode 1, which even the sitcom thought to do. It was forgivable in the 70s show because her aunts looked like stereotypical witches, so it was even easier to assume that they just used magic for their money. These aunts look like normal people and preach about how you should be a normal person. While it makes sense that they'd pawn off old stuff from their house or zap up gold to make money, it needs to be explained because this is a kids' cartoon, so they might not think of that. This boring episode is another one where it's predictable how the plot's gonna go right from the first scene. Sabrina and Chloe feel like they're not skinny enough to attract boys just because Harvey had a photo of a creepily skinny girl in his locker. And it bunches teaching the message because due to unrealistic consequences to magic, it never gets to explaining that being too skinny gives you health issues. There was obviously a better way to start the plot considering that he reveals he hates when girls try too hard to lose weight and he hates the photo. So why was it there? It could have started with them trying to squeeze into tight jeans and it would have been fine. The plot could have been perfectly justified by Jem mocking their weights, as well as some other students too because they're already used to her insults. It sounds easy, but sadly it's realistic. They use a magic scale to decrease their weight, rather than Sabrina simply pointing, which probably would have avoided the whole plot. So out of nowhere, they start getting increasingly smaller just to end up the size of dolls. For a plot that I don't have much interest in because it's both boringly overused and forced considering that Sabrina should instantly undo the spell, or at least warp her and Chloe to the magic scale. It could be that Sabrina can't use magic while shrunken. That's a required part of the spell, along with keeping them from freezing to death while shrunken. But stupidly, in a kids' cartoon, it's never explained. And neither is it explained that Spooky purposefully made the scales shrink them after a while because he couldn't stand the idea that they get bad health issues like weakness from the episode going the realistic route, where they keep returning to it to lose weight every day. But because he kept that from happening to them, and somehow didn't even tell them that could happen, he made it unlikely that they'd actually learn their lesson. Them shrinking didn't teach them to accept their normal weight. It taught them that the magic scale is bullshit and they should try a different magical method. It's lucky they learned the lesson from Harvey instead. Because a lot of girls can't be talked out of this. And they could have easily not ended up near him. Since when is it in character for Sabrina to feel like she needs to lose weight? By Chloe saying she's 12, it implies that you should think their mistake makes sense because of that. But that doesn't justify the plot when Sabrina can shapeshift in the show, so she would have thought to make a version of her body that's skinnier right away. The episode tries to teach you magic is evil, but it would have been avoided if she used magic directly to get skinnier. Instantly met with Harvey, who would talk sense into her and try to get her back to normal by forcing her to overeat. And then she would tell her aunt to erase his memory and return her weight as she's fainting from exhaustion. A bit shorter episode, but there's no excuse for the show having one story per episode. That just means forced writing to make a story too long. I get why she is Spooky at first if it's to save magic, but she should have realized his spells backfire on her every time until it's to undo his spell. And it's not explained that it's on purpose to teach her a lesson, but at least I can think of that. A show that has to have a lesson every episode isn't that much better than educational television for little kids. And at least those shows have a lot more variety in what they're teaching, instead of a severely padded out plot with one message that's usually botched. So logically, even Sesame Street is better for kids. Why do you think everyone recommends that for little kids and not this show? If it was a popular show, most people would instantly think of it when thinking of good shows. Sabrina the Animated Series, Episode 12. Harvey invites Sabrina to the movies and quickly unlikably hands Sabrina a letter with a condescending tone he doesn't have to have. It turns out Quigley's car got repossessed because Quigley didn't get handed a letter telling him to call them. Somehow. He's mad at her for not writing down the message after she answered the phone. So the story starts with an idiot bomb. But if he just told her to zap up a copy of his car, it wouldn't matter anymore. Then he recites a lame rhyme about chores that the ants would never say. Quigley complains that Hilda didn't water the plants and they died. How did that happen when she has no job and nothing to do all day, no reason to be too tired to do that? Then Zelda gets food splashed onto her because she was experimenting in the kitchen. Quigley says she wasn't allowed to do that and grounds the whole family. Hilda lampshades he can't do that because she's 600 years old. If the writer knows that, he has no excuse for putting him in the show. Salem's also grounded just for calling him Quigster. Why is Hilda saying Quigley's turning into a real control freak when he's always like that and she'd know that? Zelda also complains about that, and it's satisfying that Quigley listens into what they're saying. The next day he's gone. On the first watch it looks like the show is trying to manipulate you into feeling bad for him because it looks like they hurt his feelings, even though he would have known they were so unhappy with him all along. The problem is, this just leads to the story where his replacement is somehow even worse. In fact, she kicks down the door, which wouldn't happen because she'd know that she'd instantly get charged, and these witches have no excuse for following her orders instead of doing that. So rather than Quigley actually realizing he was wrong, it looks like he hired this bitch to gaslight them into thinking he was perfectly fine and punish them the whole episode. They had every right to complain about him, and he had no right to punish them for it when he had no business eavesdropping on them. Hilda also lampshades that she's giving them all of the orders when she's been hired to work for them. It's also offensive that the nanny has a German accent. It makes it harder for her to be understood, and she's clearly evil. So what's the point of making her talk like this? Why would you use a stereotype in a show all about teaching kids lessons? I'm just missing out on most of her dialogue this way. But I'm not really missing anything, since she's just an unrealistic drill sergeant. I guess Sabrina and Hilda are intentionally doing the cleaning badly. So it would be contrived if that wasn't good enough to make her give up on ordering them around. But obviously it'd be better to just make her nice, or turn her into a statue. That'd be way faster. Also, Zelda uses magic on the mail to try to scare the nanny. The only way she could not be terrified by magic is if she used to be a witch and her powers were taken away. But in this show, even someone who tried to take over the world kept his powers. And if that was the case for her, she would have confronted them on it. So it just makes it even more forced that they got to this point. Sabrina's family spends a long time making a wand of niceness in a cauldron. I have to assume the reason they didn't do this earlier is that they're uncomfortable with brainwashing. Not that they're showing it because they're all smiling. And they made it in a potion because they want to conserve magic, since even Sabrina can just point to change someone's personality in a later episode. There's just no way the nanny would expect breakfast to be made for her. She'd only act like this if Quigley was offering her extra pay if she acted like a bitch. Why would the nanny ask the family if they're okay? She has no reason to be suspicious of them, and if she's really suspicious of them, there's even less of a reason for her to drink anything they offer. The nanny becomes nice, telling them their toast is delicious, and she lets her hair down because it's hot, and turns on the stereo to dance to some music, and opens the window and dances with Salem. There's no way she'd do that if the spell is making her nice, because she'd instantly figure out Salem doesn't appreciate this and stop. She tells them they don't need to do chores and can do whatever they want. Sabrina sees smelly trash cans outside of her house and her nanny doing Tai Chi. I don't care how much the writer wants me to think she's weird. I'd take a character that's weird but nice any day over the real her. The nanny must be acting like a hippie because she's trying to imitate the nicest people she can think of. But it's racist to have her stop using her German accent just because she's nice now. And she wouldn't have let Hilda's fish die if the spell is that she's nice now. She also redecorated a room in Zelda's house and replaced her chemicals with flowers. There's no reason that to happen either if the spell is to make her nice. She'd know they wouldn't appreciate what she's doing. The same goes for installing a disco ball and serving them tree bark and dandelions for dinner. Any episode like this where the horrible status quo gets changed just for the writer to force the writing to have the characters miss the status quo is just absolute garbage. There's no way the witches would put up with their behavior when they were fine with brainwashing her once. I assume the reason they don't brainwash her into never doing these mistakes again every time is that they think it'd be crossing the line to brainwash her even more and they're secretly feeling guilty. But that isn't coming through. They just look like idiots. The story gets spiteful and avaricious when Sabrina is a problem because the nanny didn't write down a message for her. And Harvey wants to listen to the CD at Sabrina's house because the CD player broke. I wish it was explained why it broke because this seems contrived. He says the house stinks. Again, the nanny won't have the house like this because if she's been made nice, she'd have the compassion to fix that problem. It's almost like she definitely is being bribed by Quigley, to the point where she still thinks the money would be worth it, so she keeps ruining their house, except now she's planning to give the bribe money to charity, which is why she keeps thinking this is okay. And she wouldn't have thrown out Sabrina's CD player either. She also wouldn't make a loud dinging sound either. She definitely wouldn't get rid of the VCR and TV. Without proper justification, this plot is just embarrassing. Harvey smartly makes excuses to leave. If the nanny was born without the capacity for empathy to begin with, and the logic is that the wand only heightens the compassion you already have, this could make sense if she was a sociopath. All the wand was about was making people present themselves as nice, apparently. But there's no way this would be the case, though. Why would a magic wand made specifically to make people nice not increase their compassion? Rather than zapping up a new nanny, the family find out that Quigley's in a book and he's doing an overly long lesson to people on housework and cooking. Sabrina's family notices that he's happy, and he makes it clear that he's never been so happy. So there's no excuse for Sabrina to ask him if he'd want to come back home, considering how she often acts like she's too good to use magic. She even says it's wrong of them to ask. So they should have just zapped up a new Quigley who wasn't as controlling. Somehow he agrees and gets a hug in a sappy moment, try to force you to find it heartwarming. But I'm not forgetting how Quigley was at the start of the episode. I get why they'd be so traumatized if they wouldn't trust nannies anymore, but realistically, chances are very slim that hiring a nanny would have this result. So any rational person would just hire a new nanny. And any smart person would zap up one for free. And I thought Quigley was supposed to live with them because her aunts are teenagers. So why is he allowed to leave them? It should have been explained that his plan was to still let them call him and pretend he's still looking after them when necessary. Or else it would have been taken away by social services because the nanny wasn't given permission to be their legal guardian. Quigley sees the nanny running around streaking and says he doesn't want to know if that was the nanny he hired. He should have expected a bunch of witches to change her personality. He had a mortal go against witches. That's so irresponsible. They would have hired a normal nanny, and the obviousness of how the show would only be better that way just highlights how stupid the one who thought up the show's premise and the executives who'd say no to kicking him out of the show really are. The story should have explained that he bribed her to be more of a bitch because there's no way a nanny would act like she did at the start of the episode, because you know she'd get fired and arrested right away. This episode's about Quigley hearing the family call him a control freak and ditching them, even though he'd know they'd feel that way about him, and he'd have only stayed here so long if he didn't care. So the only way this makes sense is if he only ditched them with the intention of bribing their new nanny to be as evil to them as possible to manipulate them into unrealistically asking for him back, instead of just zapping up a new nanny. They would have called the cops as soon as she knocked down their door. Considering how unlikable he was, why did the writer make him so happy? Of course the witches brainwashed her to be nicer. What did he expect? The only other thing he could expect is that they would abuse magic on her to terrify her, which they did. The whole episode felt frustratingly arbitrary. It should have been explained that the magic wand only makes people try harder to present themselves as nice, rather than actually increasing how considerate they are. But even then, there's no way in hell the wand of niceness would be like that, because that's not what someone who'd make it would want. And they'd have known it'd be like that because the book they'd have followed to make it would have warned them. And to state the obvious here, it's pretty weird that in a kids' cartoon about teaching you lessons, the story doesn't end with her back to normal. Like, the supposedly sympathetic main character has permanently ruined her personality,